My name is Chef Joanne, so I am the executive chef of Unilever Food Solutions, Arabia, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka. And because it's Mental Health Week, as part of our Fair Kitchens movement, we wanted to bring you a mental health talk with Dr. Saliha of Lighthouse. But before we begin, let me just share with you a little bit about Fair Kitchens. In one of the slides, you would see a picture of Anthony Bourdain, and he has unintentionally became the poster guy for mental awareness in the food and hospitality industry. So from the outside, he seems to have it all. Everyone who at some point idolized or envied his life, never knew that he had this time bomb that went off and caught us all by surprise. And unfortunately, it didn't stop there. And there are still many famous chefs, committing suicides, and they have their breakdowns have been documented on social media, and it's happening more frequently, and especially now with this pandemic, which has affected the industry, the F&B industry, the most. So if you can move the other slide, please, Doctor. So Fair Kitchens is technically or basically a call for change to raise awareness and engage with people working in the industry. We want to get more and more people to recognize this issue, not be ashamed to talk about it, amplify it in the future, and eventually create a working culture that can help the industry attract and retain talent, which is a huge issue right now. We also want to encourage that, it would allow careers to thrive by having mentorship, inclusivity, and diversity, and shift away from an unhealthy lifestyle and environment that is commonly associated with this kind of job. So one might ask, so how do we do that? So technically, it's very simple. Building a fair kitchen can start simply by following these actions behind the acronym TEAMS. So if you can, if you can move to the other slide, Doctor. Thank you. So behind the picture of Bourdain, it's supposed to spell out TEAMS. T, which is to talk openly. E is to excite passion. We have to constantly remind ourselves why we love this job and why we have to stay in this job. A is to act as one. Since we work in teams most of the time, we have to be supportive of each other in order for us to progress together. M is to make time to do something for yourself and to give back to the community. And lastly, a very, simple act is to say good job to your workmates. This simple act can really have a huge positive effect, to your friend or to someone that you work with. So that's it for me. Over to you, Dr. Saliha of Lighthouse Arabia. Thank you for giving me time.
Thank you, Joanne. And I'm really sorry. I'm not sure what happened with this slide, but that TEAMS acronym sounds beautiful. I really love that. And so hopefully we can find a way to make sure that everybody sees that. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I'm not sure what happened with that slide, but thank you for sharing that. I really love it, actually. So thank you guys for having me. Unilever, we are talking about mental health today. On October 10th was World Mental Health Day, and we will, I'm not sure what just happened. Sorry, guys. I'm having like some real technical issues here. Here we go. And so we are, and before we get into that, I want to just identify who we are. So like I said, I'm Dr. Saliha Afridi. I'm a clinical psychologist and the managing director of the Lighthouse Arabia. And I want to mention Lighthouse Arabia as a resource that you guys have. Everything that we're doing online, we have about 17 support groups that are free of charge. So if at any point you feel like this is, oh, wow, she's talking about things that might actually be quite triggering, I want you to go on our website. I want you to register for these free support groups that are led by psychologists. There's all sorts of other things that we do, but I don't really need to get into that. I just wanted to mention that to you guys. And then also mental health first aid. If you really feel like there's a lot of people that are coming to you, and there's a lot of people that are opening up to you, and there's a lot of people that are speaking to you about mental health issues or maybe their struggles or difficulties, then I would really recommend getting a mental health first aid certification. It's a 10-hour course, evidence-based, 23 countries, coming out of Australia. So I would just want to mention those two things before I jump right into the talk. So I want to talk a little bit about what is mental health, what is mental illness, then also speak about depression and anxiety, because those are the two most common illnesses that we see worldwide. Now, there's so many different fallacies that people have about what is mental health and what is mental illness. And maybe some people have mental health and maybe only some people have mental illness. And then we think about mental illness, we have all sorts of images that come up, and they usually are very inconsistent with actually the reality of things. So we're really just going to break things down for you guys. And also know that this is in the food and beverage industry, in the kitchen, some of these things are actually very, very present. It's a high, intense environment, lots of emotions, lots of, sometimes yelling and shouting going on. It can be very, very stressful. And so it might be very, very triggering for people, which can then help to have them spiral in. So I want to loop that in somehow within that conversation. Also know that there's a Q&A box, guys, that you guys can just drop your questions into at any point, and I'll be very happy to answer them towards the end. Okay. So just a few facts on mental health and mental health problems. 1 in 4 people worldwide is struggling with some sort of mental health disorder. Now, just look at your life, just look around, and at some point in their life, there's been 25% of those people that have actually struggled with a diagnosable disorder. Mental health does not discriminate, doesn't matter how high your IQ is, how young you are, what gender you are, race, religion, it doesn't matter. You are all, we are all susceptible to some of these things. And I think the world that we're living in right now, the pressures that we're facing right now, this can really actually, actually is a global phenomenon right now. Every 40 seconds, someone dies of suicide. So just within this talk, you can imagine that there will be 60 people. And then, of course, I loved Anthony Bourdain, and it was just really, really disheartening, because you never expect some of these things to happen in the way they happen. And he was filming and he was, there, and then one day he wasn't. And so it doesn't show up necessarily with this big, huge neon sign. And so it can be quite disheartening for people. Depression is also the second most common illness amongst all physical illnesses and about all mental illnesses, but it is the leading cause of disability worldwide. So that's a fact that across the board, globally, in every country, with doesn't matter what religion, you are seeing depression being the leading cause of disability worldwide. So let's talk a little bit about what mental health is. So mental health is not only what crazy people have or weak people have. This is the same. It's not the same thing as mental illness. And it's not about feeling good all the time. So a lot of times, because we live in this like happiness, positive psychology type of world, we just think that if we're having a few bad days, that I have some sort of mental health problems. That's not it. What mental health is something that we all have. So we all have a physical health. We also have a mental health. So if you have a mind, you have mental health. Okay. So I want you to think about this as mind's health or emotional health. And it's very, very important to your overall health, because there is no such thing as mind-body disconnection. Literally if I break my ankle, then my hip and my knee and my back and my neck, everything gets impacted just because I broke my ankle. And the same thing goes with when my mind goes off balance or when my emotions go off balance, it impacts my whole internal system. It will affect my liver, it will affect my kidneys, and that's a fact. Then 90% of all difficulties are resulting, 90% of all primary care reports are a result of stress. And chronic stress can actually lead to depression because it depletes you of your serotonin. So mental health is the health of the mind, the thoughts, and your feelings. So I want you to think about mental health on a spectrum. You have good mental health, and then you have poor mental health. Poor mental health, if you go further down that spectrum, you're going to see mental illness. Okay, so sometimes there can be a few weeks where I don't necessarily take care of my mental health, and I'm going to start to see myself sliding down that scale. And if I don't address it when it hits that poor mental health, it can go deeper into that mental illness. So I want you to see mental health in this way. Some weeks we are really in good physical shape, and then we go on holiday and we start to eat burgers and pizzas, and we might start to not feel as good in our physical health. Same thing is mental health, but mental illness is beyond poor mental health, okay? It is a little bit different, and it is diagnosable, and it is very, very disabling. When we define mental health by the World Health Organization, it is someone who is able to realize their potential. They're able to cope with the normal day-to-day stress. They can work productively, and they can make a contribution within their society, in their community. So that's what mental health is. That is this person living their full potential? Are they engaged with life? Are they doing something for their community, their family, their academics, etc.? And are they able to actually cope with the stressors that life is giving them? And with COVID has come so many different stressors, right? But there's some people that are coping with those stressors. And again, this is abnormal level of stress that we are facing. And the food and beverage industry has really been hit because of all the different closing of different restaurants, but also the, restaurants are not at full capacity. So you have to let go of certain people. So turnover and not having support necessarily due to cutting of budgets, all of these pressures are above and beyond what would be in the normal day-to-day kitchen pressure or life pressure. But COVID really amplified some of these things. So if you're struggling during COVID, it actually is quite a normal thing, because it's actually very normal for you to struggle in abnormal events. And this is a once in a lifetime, once in a century type of thing that we're going through at this point. So this is what mental health is. So mental illness is when we are actually experiencing major changes to our thoughts, feelings, and behavior. It's persistent over time. It impairs your functioning, and it interrupts your life. Okay, so this is what it looks like in mental health. And I'm actually going to go into what depression looks like and what anxiety looks like. So this is not where 4 days I've had just a really bad few days, or I get in a fight with one of my colleagues and, for a week I'm not feeling well. That's not it. Mental illness is actually very, very debilitating. It impairs your functioning. It's to the point where you might not even be able to go to work. You might be calling out of work. You might actually become physically sick. You might actually become emotionally, paralyzed, because it is that debilitating. So obviously we never want to get to that place, but many of us have. And 1 in 4 people actually have. When we think about mental illness, we think about, these heavy sort of, people crying, sobbing, dark clouds over people's heads and people not being able to function. We might even think about institutions. We might think about straitjackets where people are having psychotic episodes. That's what we think about when we think about mental illness. What mental illness really starts to look like is this, where you have these really, really prominent figures who have very, very successful lives and influence and friends and love and admiration of people. And you find that these people struggled with depression, eating disorders, substance abuse, anxiety, and then, even suicidality in some case. So this is what it actually looks like. And I think in the world that we live in now with social media, so many of us are so used to putting up a front. And inside, we're actually just falling apart most of the time. And so this is what mental illness can also look like. So yes, there are periods in your life where you might just have this dark cloud and this weight on your chest, but that's not it. It actually is way more than that. it actually looks like this. And so you can actually have anxiety and appear very confident. You can be suicidal and turn up to work just fine, but inside you're just wishing that you would be dead and gone, and I wish I could end this. You can have these same thoughts but still show up to work. You could actually be having a panic attack in the bathroom minutes before you go up for a performance. You could be battling depression but still put on a persona where you're telling jokes and you're light. You could actually be a team player but still feel worthless and hopeless and really, really self-critical. You could actually be very, very successful and feel like an imposter. So it's actually very invisible to the eye. And so what you might see is not what is happening inside of people. And that's why it's so important for us to be attuned to each other, for us to say, hey, how are you really doing? You know, I've noticed. And so this is where you start to have these kinds of conversations, which is so good if you get trained in mental health first aid, where you learn to have some of these conversations and have the real conversations, which can bring up some difficult feelings. Now, obviously, I've mentioned that there's no mind-body disconnection, and there's a huge impact of your mental state on your physical state. There's something called the vagus nerve, which connects the brain to every major organ in your body, your liver, your stomach, your gut, your heart, your lungs. All of that is connected to your brain. And so if this part of me starts to feel a little bit wobbly, guess what else is starting to feel a little bit wobbly? And when you have chronic levels of stress, there is something that called cytokines that are released in your body, and they go and they lodge up in your brain. And you have enough of those, you start to deplete yourself of really positive chemicals. And now you're putting stress on your body, and now you're putting stress on your mind. So there is no disconnect between the mind and body. If I don't get good sleep, I will be impacted mentally. If I don't meditate, my amygdala is actually going to be a lot more reactive. If I don't exercise, I will have symptoms of depression and anxiety at some point that I can't manage. So they're very much linked. Among some diseases, it actually can increase your lifespan if you take care of your mental health by 3 decades, and it can actually decrease it by just as much. So it really is constantly communicating with each other. And people who have depression, the physical body pain, so there's fibromyalgia and there's other physical diseases that you might actually amplify as a result of mental health issues. So like I said, there is no mind-body disconnection. Everything works as one. It's very, very important for us to intervene early. And that's why it's so important for us to catch some of these things early and get rid of some of this macho culture that we might actually have. You know, a lot of men work in these kitchens, and women and men work in kitchens, but there's a lot of this toughen up kind of patriarchal type of philosophy. And, come on, if you can't take the heat, get out of the kitchen kind of language. And if you can't tolerate yelling and screaming, then get out of the kitchen. And that's not what we want, right? We want to be able to be having these, kind and compassionate spaces where we can actually lean into each other, connect with each other, and talk to each other, encourage each other. Because if we can get in and open up earlier, we actually cut down on the time that the treatment is required. Now imagine if I start to feel a little bit low and I go to my colleague and I say, hey, listen, man, I'm not feeling very good. And he's able to have that conversation with me, or she's able to have that conversation with me. And then he says, maybe you should go talk to someone. And then I go talk to someone just when I caught my symptoms. Imagine the opposite, where I am digging and digging and digging and digging deeper into a dark state. And now I'm not leaving my bed. And now the people at work are calling me and saying, hey, Sal, where are you? What have you been doing? And it's like, oh, I can't even get out of bed. And now I have to go into a treatment. It's going to take a whole lot longer. So Obviously, the impact on my physical health, on my relationships, on my self-esteem, on my motivation, on me keeping my job, all of that is impacted if we don't intervene early, if we don't start having these conversations, and if we don't think about the energy that we are putting out into the environment. And if you happen to be one of those people that are screaming and shouting, you're probably going to be fine, but know that you're having a really bad impact on the people around you because it does make the environment very toxic. And so that's one thing that I would like to say, that if making it a space where people can start having some of these conversations, a containing space where you're holding some of this, is actually going to make it easier to intervene and make the treatment shorter. But it's a sad thing to say that 2 out of 3 people actually do not reach out and get treatment. So 1 out of 4 is struggling, and out of that is actually 2 out of 3 are actually not getting any treatment. And I would say, I don't have the numbers necessarily for the food and beverage industry, but I would imagine that the numbers are probably a whole lot higher when it comes to people not reaching out and talking about these things. So I feel very glad that we're having these kinds of conversations now and shining the light on mental health. And so what are some of the risk factors? I think it's important to understand that no one thing leads to depression, or no one thing leads to anxiety. It can be social factors. If you're living in the region, then definitely maybe you're away from your family systems. You might be an expat. You might only just gotten here, so you don't have your mom, dad, aunt, uncle, grandparents around perhaps. Psychologically speaking, you might not have the coping skills. We're not born with these skills. We have to learn these skills. And then biologically, we might actually be predisposed to depression, meaning it is in our family and you have enough stress and it unlocks the door for the depression to come on. So there's something called the stress diathesis model. And when you have a family history, that means I have a gene. This is the gene, and it needs enough stress to click it open. And that's what happens, because we know from epigenetics that lifestyle and our psychological resources and our social supports can actually increase the levels of stress and unlock this depression or anxiety. So just because my mom had depression, or my dad had depression, or my grandmother had depression, does not mean I will too. You have to have enough stress in your environment in order for this thing to unlock. So your lifestyle and your psychological resources and your social support systems will become very, very important. When it comes to biological, obviously, if you have hormonal imbalances, your thyroid, your vitamin deficiency, if you have a chronic illness like cancer or an autoimmune disease, then you actually are you're more vulnerable to develop a mental health issue, because you're up against a lot more. If you have a high-risk pregnancy, if you have a physical disability or a mental disability, you might actually be more prone or more vulnerable. Does not mean, oh my God, I have a hormone imbalance, then I must get depression. No, like I said, all of these factors come together and then it clicks in. So I could actually have a chronic illness, but because I have good psychological support and social support in place, I might not develop a mental health. So these things do have to come together. When it comes to psychological risk factors, low self-esteem, if you're self-critical of yourself, that harsh inner voice, a cynical outlook on life, which, you know what, a lot of us might be struggling with right now. If you struggle with perfectionism, or if you have a history of experiencing trauma or abuse, if you are struggling with grief that is unprocessed and you haven't let that one go, in the sense that you haven't released it from your physical body, if you're being labeled all the time by other people or by yourself, if you're comparing your life to other people, which I think most of us are doing these days, thanks to social media, I think these things are really going to put you in a more vulnerable state. So you really need to work on these things to build up enough immunity when it comes to mental health. So if you see yourself in any one of these, that, oh yeah, I do struggle with perfectionism, then it would be something that you need to address, because at some point that could eventually end up breaking you. Social factors, especially in this part of the world, there's the expat life, and there's a little bit of loneliness that people might be feeling, bullying. And I think this is where a lot of the Fair Kitchens initiative started, is that, it can become a place where you feel bullied and it's toxic. And, it feels unstable. Every day you go in and you're anxious because someone might be yelling at you about something, or they just might not be encouraging because you're just moving really fast and come on, get on with it. Like that kind of thing can really amplify all the noise already that is inside. If you're experiencing racism or discrimination, poverty, war, unstable political environment, a divorce, relationship problems, legal or financial problems. Like these things are real things that are happening to people these days. A lot of people are struggling with relationship issues. A lot of people are struggling with financial issues. Now you have all these other COVID things piling up. And then you have a toxic work environment, or not a friendly work environment, or a pushy person next to you at work. All of a sudden, this stuff starts to overflow. So let's take a closer look at depression and anxiety, because those are the two major mental health disorders, okay? So what is clinical depression? So these are some of the signs and symptoms, and they must be there for at least 2 weeks. So just because you had a few bad days, just because, you had low mood, does not mean that you are depressed. You have to have at least 5 or more of these for most of the day, every day, causing significant impairment in your functioning. So the main hallmark of depression actually is that you lose the interest for pleasurable activities. You actually feel like, oh God, I don't think, I go out to have fun, but when I get there, I just want to go back and crawl into my bed. And so things that you used to enjoy, you don't enjoy anymore. You might actually be tearful most of the day, every day. That is not necessary. Remember, we're just looking for 5 of these, okay? Loss of energy, tiredness, you can't concentrate, you can't make decisions, you have difficulty falling asleep, or you have too much sleep. You have changes in your appetite, you're eating too little, or you're eating too much, you're irritable, you're feeling unworthy, you feel guilty, you think about death a lot. Now remember, we're looking for most of the day, every day, for at least 2 weeks, causing significant impairment in your work. Now, what could that look like? Well, you're calling out of work, or you show up late to work. Now your boss is yelling at you, or your colleague is giving you like the stink eye because they think that, oh my God, why do you keep showing up late and putting all the burden on me? This is where you're really struggling, guys. It actually makes you disabled to actually function in the way you used to function. It is different from normal sadness. Sadness is a normal emotion. I get sad, and there are days where I'm like feeling really low, and it can, but then I usually bounce back. You're still able to take pleasure. So I might still able to like watch my favorite Netflix or like eat my favorite food and still be able to enjoy that. But when you're depressed, it almost is like everything loses its zest. You just lose the flavor of life. The things that used to give you flavor, life, love, all of that seems to just be gone. Then there are also minor changes in, when it comes to sadness, that, you become a little bit irritable. There, maybe you're sleeping a little bit less or sleeping a little bit more, but it doesn't seem to cause major shifts in the way you are. Depression, and I've actually had clinical depression at one point, in the sense that it wasn't major depression. It was actually an adjustment depression, because there is 3 types of depression. Depression that actually is a result of a life adjustment that you have to make. So anytime a major adjustment happens, you go, but then you bounce back, right? You get 6 weeks, 8 weeks, and then you bounce back. And then there is major depression. Major depression is where you go deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper into that space. And then there is depression, which doesn't necessarily meet all the criteria, but it actually is like you're meeting most of the criteria, but you still can't taste life. So this might be like almost a existential or spiritual crisis that you might be having, but it has a depressed mood. So what we're talking about is major depression. And major depression is very, very disabling. Adjustment disorder obviously is disabling, but is not you do end up bouncing back. And so it is important to know the difference between the two. And I think Anthony Bourdain did struggle with major depression. And he did have episodes where he might have been abusing substances to numb some of those difficult feelings or different traumas that he might have had in his life. And that eventually resulted in him taking his own life. When it comes to clinical anxiety, these are some of the symptoms that you're going to see. Now, clinical anxiety is different from anxious. Okay, like there are periods where I'm like, oh my God, I have to go do this. And I'm now having all of these different symptoms. Again, this is for a prolonged period of time, and it disrupts your way of functioning. So a lot of times people have a fear of public speaking, but then they still show up on stage and they do what they need to do. They might not be able to do it to the best of their abilities, but they still get on there. But if it's really clinical levels of anxiety, they will freeze, they will go throw up, they will actually not be able to function. And it actually is really, really draining them every time they actually have to present. So these are some of the symptoms. Physically, you're going to feel it: pounding heart, chest pain, flushing. It basically is a fight or flight response. All your fingers start to tingle, your heart starts to race, you're ready to fight or flight. And then your stomach issues, all your systems that are long-term, like your sex drive, your libido, your GI, your digestive system, immunity, everything shuts down because it's ready to fight or flight. You do not need to be digesting food when you're about to become someone else's food when it comes to being chased by a lion. And these systems are very archaic. So the anxiety symptom is very, very archaic and predates, way, way back, hundreds of thousands of years, where the fight or flight system got built into the mammals. And so this is where it's coming from. However, the fight or flight system is different from anxiety because human beings are the only animals that can psychologically turn on that fight or flight response. I could be sitting in the Maldives, sipping on my drink, and all of a sudden I start thinking about a person who's really, really hectic, and I'm now having a full-blown anxious attack, right? And so that's the difference between the fight or flight response that is fear-based versus something that is being that is anxiety-based. Anxiety is us making up stuff in our mind. Fear is when we're actually being attacked and in that moment. And so a lot of anxiety symptoms really actually can be very psychological in nature. And so you'll see a lot of impatience, anger, confusion, feeling on edge. Your mind starts to race, you feel blank. There's obviously very little room for learning or concentration. You might make a lot more mistakes. You might actually, constantly find yourself worrying because what happens is your aperture narrows and you actually start to see all the negative things that are happening in the environment because that is your fight or flight response. You do not need to be thinking, oh, look how beautiful those clouds are when you're in a fight or flight response. You literally are thinking about survival. And so you start to pick out every positive thing that might be negative in your environment, every negative thing, possible thing that is negative in your environment. And then behaviorally, if you have anxiety, you now start to avoid. I'm not even going near that person. I'm not going to go talk to that person. You might actually start to use a lot more drugs and alcohol to numb some of these feelings. You might be smoking more. You might be doing more shisha. You might be having a little bit more to drink because you find yourself constantly, engaged in this anxious state, which is just intolerable if we think about it. So we all have normal worry. I already talked about that. We all have normal worry. It's a very, very normal thing. I can get worried. I can get jolted. I can have a full, oh my God, I can't believe that I missed it. I missed this meeting. I missed this presentation. But then it's temporary and it just goes away. And there's no suicidal thoughts. It can be brought on by a life situation or an event. It's very adaptive. It's triggered by a specific event. And so that's what normal anxiety, normal worry looks like. Clinical anxiety, it is a lot more long lasting. Now, this is how people are living. And then soon they start to worry about everything. Soon they start to worry about, oh my God, am I going to be late for work? And now I have to leave 2 hours earlier so I don't get yelled at by my boss. So all of a sudden, there's major changes in your thoughts and feelings and behaviors. you do start to say, I can't live like this anymore. I don't want to live like this anymore. So these suicidal thoughts start to creep in. And when I say suicidal thoughts, guys, I'm not saying I'm now ready to take my life. The thoughts show up like, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to live like this anymore. Somebody put me out of this misery. They start like this, and then they get louder, and then they get louder if you don't address it. It's a serious clinical condition, and it doesn't necessarily get triggered by an event or environment because, like I said, the aperture is narrow. So every little thing that I do could actually throw me into an anxiety attack. So it's not like, oh, there's a presentation or I'm traveling and I feel anxious. It's not like that. It actually is, everything is now starting to get looked at by a lens of worry and anxiety and oh my God, this is going to go wrong too. And oh my God, this is going to go wrong too. It's constantly living with that cortisol being rushing through your body. And so there's a lot of there's a lot of people with high functioning anxiety, and they're really, and we might see a lot of this in the kitchens as well, where you look very detail oriented and you're very outgoing, you're very active, you're super helpful, hardworking, performing really well under pressure, you're loyal, right? This looks like a perfect person to work with, but inside, you might have a person who's overthinking and they're constantly seeking approval. Was I good? Do they like me? Let me go out a little bit more. Let me make sure he likes me too. Let me take her out for dinner. Their inability to slow down because they constantly feel like they need to have this energy moving. They can't say no. They're afraid of failure. They might actually be procrastinating, and they might actually have poor boundaries. They might not be able to stand up or talk for themselves. And when we are speaking about, fair kitchens, it's really about setting some boundaries that, hey, listen, can you speak to me in a way that is kind and not yell at me all the time? Like that seems like, oh my God, I can't say that. So this could actually be someone who really struggles with anxiety. This is obviously much harder to spot because everyone likes this detail-oriented, hardworking, performing under pressure type of person who always is a yes, 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 yes. But inside, they're really just chipping away at their soul because they don't know how to set some boundaries. Very draining, it's very isolating, and they're not likely to get support because they don't get picked up very easily because they're showing up, they're getting things done, everything is happening. That stuff is really harder. You have to be really attuned to that person very, very in a nuanced way. Obviously, it takes a lot. You go home, you're exhausted. You don't want to hang out with anybody anymore. Your family gets the worst of you. This really is about to go either into a full-on, you blow up at someone, you lose it, you throw your apron in and you're out of there, or you just might have a meltdown and you break down, and that's usually what happens. I've never seen anyone be able to sustain this. You might make it 30 years, you might even make 40 years, but at some point it catches up to you. And I remember working with one of my mentors, and he says, you borrow from the future. When you're running like this, you're literally borrowing energy from the future, and then you get to the future, and that's where you break down. So if you want to safeguard your mental health, I think it's very important to think about it as hygiene. Many of you guys might have seen my Instagram video on World Mental Health Day where I talk about emotional hygiene, mental hygiene. When I say hygiene, it really puts the frame of mind that this is something you need to tend to every single day. This is not just, oh, you do once a week, or you do, when you feel good about it. You literally have to do it every single day. Pay attention to your emotional pain, your triggers. When you feel big feelings and when you feel overwhelmed or when you feel angry, it's a signal to you that something is not right. A boundary is being crossed and you are not speaking up and defending yourself, and you're betraying yourself in that moment. Obviously, you need the basics, like you need sleep, you need exercise, you need water, you need nutrition. Like if you don't have these basics in place, you're already operating from like half cup, okay? And we need to fill that cup up. So if you really want to go in energized to be able to take on some of these psychological battles or these contextual battles, then you need to have a strong physical body. You don't do these basics, then you're going to have a very weak physical body to be able to take on the mental challenges. Be curious about yourself, have a relationship with yourself. You know, am I speaking to myself in the way that I would speak to a friend? Because most often we're harshest on ourselves, and that really can start to take an emotional toll. This is an emotional vocabulary. Now, I just wanted to put that up there to stress you guys out, basically. But this is something that every person needs to know, that most of us are obviously just operating from three. I'm happy, I'm sad, I'm mad, period. But the more granular you are about your emotions, the more likely you are to catch them when they're in the light zone. So if I say, you know what, I feel a little bit uneasy, or I'm a little bit worried, versus I am distressed. But if I catch it in the uneasy space, I'm able to catch it earlier, and then I'm able to cope with it earlier. That's what we call granular emotional intelligence. So learn as many words as you can learn when it comes to your emotional experience, and start to label them. The more you are able to label, the more you are able to tame. In psychology, we actually say, name it to tame it. So when you start to name feelings, you start to tame them. And basically, there's brain integration happening, and all of these calming chemicals go pouring through your brain. And immediately you feel like, okay, I got this. The second I can name something, I can tame that. So developing your emotional vocabulary is going to be very, very important. And then lastly, guys, emotional and mental hygiene. You need to give yourself permission to feel, but you're not going to do that unless you have good ability to regulate that emotion. So do you have good practices in place where you are able to regulate? It's almost like having a toolbox. I have an anxiety toolbox. I breathe. I have like different aroma therapies that I have. I actually always am drinking some sort of calming tea. So there's all sorts of things that I'm constantly injecting into my system where I'm calming myself down. And so that's going to be very important, limiting your caffeine, because that can mimic anxiety, and it can drain you of magnesium, which is going to mimic depression and a lack of energy. So all of these things are really going to come together. Turn off your news, have limited social media, turn off your notifications. Noise in your head all the time is going to make you a lot more anxious. Practice mindfulness. If you guys are following me on Instagram, you will know that we have a meditation challenge going on this month that we are all going to be working on. And I posted a video about what meditation is and what mindfulness is. So that will be something to educate yourselves on, because immediately you can find your center again. No matter who's yelling at you, no matter what's going on outside of you, you find your peace in the storm because you are anchored inside of yourself. Something to explore is counseling. That's why I mentioned the support groups earlier, because those are free of charge. Anyone can go to them anywhere in the world. You can dial in, and we have a psychologist leading that stuff. Focus on your breathing, guys. Most of us are breathing from up here. We're all here, but that's a different kind of breathing, and it actually will regulate your fight or flight system. When you are breathing deeply, it literally is telling your body everything is okay. It actually is a bottom-up approach, and it actually turns off your fight or flight response in the fastest way. So if you are anxious, you are panicked, what you want to do is you want to focus on your breath. And I mentioned lots of different apps on my Instagram that you can have. There's breath work, there's Fit Mind. I would really recommend those. And then obviously celebrating small victories and savoring those victories. You guys, I mean, it's part of the teams that you mentioned that say good things to people, but also say good things to yourself. You know, say it where someone did a good job, praise them, and then also praise yourself when you do a good job. When you are seeing someone struggling, instead of saying, oh my God, that's too bad, or come on, it's not that big of a deal, but at least you have a job, or at least your boss isn't like yelling at you, or at least don't do that, because it dismisses their experience. Don't tell them to be positive. Don't tell them to be thankful for what they have. Don't tell them it's all in their head. Don't tell them it's not a big deal. because it's really, really invalidating and dismissive, and they're never going to come speak to you again. But if you are seeing someone who's struggling and someone comes to you, just say, what's it been like for you? And if I say, hey man, I'm really, really having a hard time. How long have you been feeling this way? Have you experienced something like this before? You know, what do you think would help you right now, today? How can I help you right now, today? What can I take off your plate? Give me something that I can carry. You know, I've noticed that, you know what, you just look a little bit off. Your energy's a bit low. What's going on with you? How are things for you? This is what you want to do. And again, these types of conversations become a whole lot easier when you're a mental health first aider. So be the change. This is what we want to do. And, you know, I'm sure Fair Kitchens, and I really feel sad that we didn't see the whole teams thing, but really be the change you want to see. Don't spread misinformation. Don't be judgmental. Protect people's confidentiality. If I come and tell you, hey man, I'm struggling, don't go start talking about me, because that really makes it harder for me to come and talk to you again. Don't turn the blind eye and say, I don't want to know about it. Let's not talk about it. If I don't talk about it, maybe it'll go away. Be mindful about the impact you have on other people's health. And so if you are one of those people that is constantly negative, constantly complaining, constantly problem focused, constantly yelling, then you know that you're probably impacting someone's mental health in a not a healthy way. So work on that. Contain yourself, learn ways to cope with your stress so you're not taking it out on people. Enable other people, start having those conversations, share what you've learned, manage performance and growth and well-being. So this is not just about, hey guys, we got to get the right stuff out, but it's also about we got to get the right stuff out and we got to do it in a way that is fair and good to everybody. Encourage others to get trained in mental health first aid, notice what's going on. Role model supportive mindsets and behaviors, take a mental health first aid course, and then safeguard your own mental health. It would be very, very important. I know I said a lot to you guys, but this is really just an intro talk for you guys to say, you know what? I haven't been taking this pretty seriously. I think I need to start taking it seriously. Notice it within yourself. Respect yourself in the sense that you pay attention to your feelings and not just say, come on, man, just get over it. Don't do that to yourself. That's really, really invalidating and really, really hurtful. And as President Obama said, if something inside of you feels wounded, just treat it like it's a physical injury. You've got to go get help. It's not weak, it's strong. I think we need to take the drama out of mental health and just go to it like we go to any other doctor. If I have a skin rash, I'm not going to wait till it spreads all over my body before I go to the doctor. I'm going to catch it early. I'm going to say, you know what, this needs attention. That same thing goes with emotional health. You're going to catch it early, and then you're going to treat it early, and you're going to get support for it early. And there's nothing weak about that, especially now when the world is getting so hectic. So these are some of the accounts that we have on Instagram. We put constantly information out there for your mental health and your mental well-being. And we would love to hear any of your questions on that platform. Or if you have questions now, I would be very, very happy to take them. We have about 8 minutes. And I would be very happy to take your questions right now. Does anybody have any questions, or did I just answer everybody? Joanne, do you have any things that you would like to say before we go?
You were actually very, very clear, Doctor.
Great.
A lot of things that, you know, I'm sure a lot of people are feeling.
You know, it's a lot to process. It's a lot of information that we've just consolidated into 50 minutes. And so it is a lot to digest. And I would really recommend, I mean, we'll send you the link to this video. You can share it with everybody. But I think it's important that we sort of think about this and figure out where we stand on that spectrum of mental health. Okay, so we have a couple questions, and I'm just going to read the questions and then I'm going to answer them. And then we have about 8 minutes and then we can log off. So one of the questions is that how can I make the best use of my morning? How long should I wait before checking my phone? So I think this is just, I think you already know. You already know that if you're rolling over into your bed and then you're now all of a sudden these notifications, immediately your cortisol is up and you're engaged with the day. Owning your mornings is one of the best things that you can do. Ease into the morning. Don't look at your phone if you can avoid it. And you know what? What I do is I actually lay awake in my bed and I visualize my whole day. I think about all the different things I have to do. Okay, I have to do an IG live. I have to do a talk for Unilever today. I have my therapy session today. I have to see my children. And so I imagine myself going through the day in my full power, fully engaged, fully activated, fully mindful. And then that takes me about 3 to 5 minutes. And then I get up and get on with my day. And then I have my coffee. And during my coffee, I might actually listen to a podcast, or I might just actually look out the window. Oops, sorry. That's my meditation bell. And so that's what I might do, but it really just depends on you. Oftentimes there's a lot of, okay, so I wake up, I have my coffee, I go for an exercise, either it's high intensity or I go for a walk, and then I come in and then I look at all sorts of, content that I need to get out, and then I might meditate. So it really just depends on you and how you roll and what you need to get done. But I would say at least take 5 minutes where you visualize the type of day you want to have and what type of person you want to be that day. And just do it while your eyes are closed, so you don't even look at your phone, and just turn off your notifications. And this, or maybe even turn off your phone. That's something that I've been doing more. I turn off the phone because it takes a while to power back up, and then you have to log in. So I'm just creating more obstacles before I can actually roll over and look at my phone. So I just turn off the phone at night. So that's what I would recommend. See how it feels for you, but 5 minutes, 10 minutes if you can. Don't look at your phone when you first wake up, and have your coffee or tea in the morning. Do an exercise routine, 20 minutes, and your brain lights up like a Christmas tree and you're ready and you're activated, and then look at your phone. But don't look at the news first thing in the morning, because that's definitely going to raise your cortisol levels. So I would, for someone who says, what are some quick tools you can recommend, quick phrases I can tell myself? One of the things you can tell yourself is that I am safe. Put your hand on your heart and say, I am safe. I'm okay. I'm doing the best I can. I am safe. It's just change. I am safe. It's just this person. I am safe. Because anxiety is wired into our brain prior to the age of 5, when the world is big and we feel unsafe. Okay, that's usually when some of these systems are built in, where we actually feel like our life is in danger when someone is yelling at us, or our life is in danger if we lose our job. And that's not it. You are safe. You are an adult. You're going to be able to take care of this. It's just a bad day. It's just a bad moment. What's the smallest step I need to take right now? That's another mantra that I would say. What's the smallest step that I need to take right now? And that might be, I need to log off. I need to go check on my kids. I need to. And then you know that the day is going to pass. So step by step, you want to do that. But those are 2 things that I would recommend, that you say to yourself, I am safe. I'm doing the best I can with what I have. And then what's the smallest step that I need to take right now? Another way to ground yourself in the moment is to ground yourself in the physical moment using aroma and your 5 senses. So what are 3 things I can smell? What are 5 things I can see? What are 4 things I can touch? So immediately bring yourself into the environment, and that unhooks us from that anxious thought. You might actually get up from this place and go into the next room, go check on someone, go for a walk outside, because sometimes when we're in our anxious state, we can just sort of zone in and be in this place. Move away from the place you're in and unhook. I have a longer video on coping with anxiety on my YouTube channel. My YouTube channel is just, if you Google Dr.Saliha Freedy, there's one called Coping with Anxiety on there. And I have lots of other content, coping cards on my Instagram. So I recommend that you try those things. How do you encourage a team member to seek mental health support if they're in denial, or if they want to but don't think it's accessible? Maybe you want to attend a support group with them. We have a support group. It's free of charge. It's for emotional health, because it can be very, very isolating. And oftentimes we're like, come on, man, like, I just need to toughen up. It's no big deal. Like, we dismiss, and then it really blows up. And so say, you know what, why don't we just try out the support group? It's free of charge. It's for an hour. It's on a Tuesday. Why don't we try it? And then you go there with them and you actually try the support group and see if it was any good for them. That might be one way. Or you take these kinds of webinars and you sit together and you watch those, and maybe that might spark something in them. You might, take some of these courses online with them, and that might encourage them. But I would actually say have that mental health first aid course where you can start having some of these conversations where you say, listen, I really see you struggling with this. This is anxiety. When you have this much anxiety in your system for this long, you are really, really setting yourselves up for some physical issues in the long run. Anxiety has been linked to, diabetes, because we can throw off our insulin because we're not sleeping properly, and. So there's like a cascade effect that happens. So it's sometimes really important for us to actually name what we see in the other person that we think that they need help. So those are some of the things. But I think if you know what the symptoms of anxiety are, then you're able to have that conversation with a lot more confidence and a lot more clarity. Sometimes I feel like I can't ask my superior for a break for my mental health. How do I approach the topic of talking about a mental health break with a superior who may not be as aware of something? So I think that's a really good topic. It really is about a cultural issue that you might be facing within the team. And I think this is where cultural shifts need to happen from the top down, bottom up. But I would say that, I can't tell you how to have that conversation because I don't know how open your boss is to that. And if they're not open to it, then I would actually put your job at risk. But it's important to start having some of these conversations, or maybe bringing up some of these initiatives within your workplace. Like Unilever is doing fair kitchens, inviting them to some of these talks. I know we're going to be doing lots of different events with Unilever and fair kitchens. So saying, hey, can we go to this event as a team? So shifts start to happen as a team rather than you just showing up and you only being the one actually struggling with some of these things. Until then, I would really say own the issue and do what you can about it. Draw some boundaries. I know that there's a lot of people that have to put food on the table, literally and figuratively, and they can't just leave their job, and they have a toxic boss. And so how do you protect yourself within that toxic space? That's the work that you're going to have to do until some major cultural shifts happen within that kitchen. And so I would really encourage you to look at the rest of my content on YouTube, where you can actually learn how to protect yourself from toxic people and building your muscle so you can lift some of that until we can make some major shifts. For anxiety, I would say watch the video, guys, that I have on my webinar, because it's a whole long topic. I need to take you all the way through. It's a whole other talk. And if that is something that you want to know more about, then please send an email to the organizers of this event, and we will be very happy. I'd be very happy to do that talk for you guys in particular. And so grounding is going to be very, very important, but there's so many other things that you can do. But sleep is critical for this, okay? By the way, if you are not sleeping 7 to 8 hours of sleep, you're going to be a lot more activated when it comes to your anxiety.